Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Proc-N-Roll podcast. We are your guide to practical procurement. We make procurement rock and roll. So get ready for this. Today, we have with us Natasha, the pro CPO with experience at IBM, McKesson, Salesforce, and most recently, the CPO at Nike. She brings 25 years of experience. I'm the self-proclaimed innovator from Intel, CPO at Adobe, and now founder of Graphite. Super excited to bring new, very cool technology to procurement. I've been doing this for 30 years now. And Zach, our good friend and practical procurement expert from KPMG in London, been doing procurement for 11 years. And our very, very special guest today, we're super happy to welcome Dr. Elouise Epstein with us. She brings another 25 years. So we are knocking on the door, 95 years of procurement experience here, folks. So if you're wondering how to do procurement, you have found the right place to not just talk about it, but get practical. This is good stuff. So let's jump into today's discussion. We have a bunch of, we've talked before about Dr. Elouise and the spider diagram. What we really want to do today is open up and talk about what have you learned? Like you've been looking at all of procurement tech now for, I don't know, a decade or more. You have been deeper in all of these technologies than probably anybody in this space anywhere in the world. So would really love to get some insights from you about through those years, what have you seen change? What have you learned? And what are your thoughts going forward? That's the goal for the conversation today. So, we actually dug back in the archives and found what we think is the first spider diagram. Cole, maybe you can share that out here with us. What motivated you to jump in and build the spider diagram in the first place? And what have you learned kind of pushing forward into it?
Well, first, thank you for all those kind compliments. I don't know if I can live up to that, but certainly I appreciate that. So this is the first spider chart, and it came about for two reasons. One, I had driven my career into a ditch, and so I was trying to figure out how to remain relevant, and more importantly, how to remain employed. And at the same time, we were getting a lot of inbound calls from clients that had bought a suite. Then there was a lot of suites at the time. And they'd spent lots of money and were not getting any return. Not only were they not getting the return on the investment, but the users absolutely hated it and did not use the tools. And that got me interested and curious. And by the way, you don't reach out to Kearney with a problem unless we're not cheap. So so you better have a really significant problem. And when I started to detect that trend of severe dissatisfaction, I started to really hone in and look. And that was late 2016, early 2017. And what I realized is what everybody was selling, and this includes Kearney, who's best in class, quote unquote, was just put in a suite. And the more I started to dig, the more I started to realize that was a fallacy, and in some cases, just outright pseudo fraud, I will say. And so and at the same time, that would have been mildly interesting, but I started to see the emergence of some early procure tech companies. So at the time, you had Scout RFP, and you had TradeShift was early on, and even at the time, Levadata. I remember when they were like 3 people, and I saw a job posting come through for their head of technology or something. So, and Coupa had just kind of come out of like sort of reinventing itself. So there was all of a sudden I realized that that something was changing, and the more I got into the sort of suite architecture, the more I realized that was an old architecture, because we were in the midst of the Salesforce sort of centralized platform with a app store and unified data foundation, et cetera, et cetera. And so I thought, you know what? I think we're ripe for a change here, like a dramatic change. And so everybody was over here on sort of the left end of the spectrum, and I hate to use left and right, but I decided to go to the absolute other end of the spectrum and plant the flag there. And in 2017, people thought I was crazy. My colleagues at Kearney, only one person really believed in it. Shout out to Stephen Easton, former partner here at Kearney, out of the UK office. And I think he didn't understand it either, but he liked the disruption of it. So anyway, so to make a long story short, so I put this out there, and then it took off a little bit with the financial institutions and very customer facing or customer heavy industries. But like chemical companies, oil and gas, they were just like, nope. So I made incremental benefits, but it was really the pandemic where everything had to be digitized now. And one of the first things after that was everybody realized, okay, the suite that we've bought that nobody's using, we need to do something different. So it was a little bit of right time, right place, and massive global epidemic or pandemic.
Well, thinking to the origin of the suites is kind of interesting as well, right? Because most of these didn't organically write all of the code in the suite, right? So in a lot of cases, the suite is a duct tape together hodgepodge of best of breed, kind of like, oh, well, yes, we need a CLM in here, so let's go grab this, or we need onboarding and risk, let's grab that. And, one of my biggest mistakes, hesitate to say this, but I decided for my team to implement Ariba contracts, thinking that was going to be really smart because it would integrate with everything, and then realized afterwards that the back end data from contracts didn't actually talk to the back end. And, so the suite hasn't, and probably across the board, hasn't been as unifying, I think, as we all thought it would be, back in 2005 or 10.
Well, right. And that gets to, so I now, when I do my presentations, I've broken it down to 4 eras, and you're right. And this is how far back I go because I'm old. In the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, on the back of the business to consumer.com massive growth and what ended up being an explosion or an implosion was an emerging B2B marketplace of business to business. So we had the first reverse auctions, the first e-sourcing, ERFPs, et cetera. And so companies like Free Markets, Abbreviate, where I came from, early versions of Ariba, and then some of the bigger ones like i2 and Managestics and all these other folks. So they were all nascent, and there was a lot of just little point solutions floating around. And Conrad, you're absolutely right. The first suites were an amalgamation of that stuff that in 2005 to 2010 sort of coalesced and then went to market. And so yeah, and then so then we had 1.0 is sort of that early innovation of the B2B, best of breed, and then we get the suites, and then what my spider map represents is version 3.0, which is this SaaS explosion, and it's a reaction to so the suites were a reaction to a bunch of point solutions floating around. The SaaS explosion that the spider map is a reaction to the failures of the suites. And of course, we'll talk later, but now we are entering a new phase.
Yeah. So watching this that closely, any insights that have just sort of come to you as you watch this transformation? I mean, by the way, as we all know this, it isn't like we arrived now, right? Like this is just a constantly evolving world, but it seems I went to the first Ariba I'm not saying the first one, but the first one I went to was in San Diego 100 years, like probably 25, 30 years ago. And to be in this giant hotel conference room with procurement people rocking out, like loud music, people on stage. Yes. And I'm just thinking, like, procurement is so boring and weird. And like, all of a sudden I've got all these friends around me. It felt like, hey, it's not just me writing procurement websites at Intel. It's like, everyone's into this. It was so much fun. But from there to now, it's like, it's different. It isn't just like 2 or 3 companies making procurement cool. I think that was one of their things. We make procurement cool or great or something.
Yeah. So I think this gets to, so I have a series of reactions to that. So certainly the procurement function as a formal function with a CPO and sort of clear lines of reporting is barely 30 years old, if that. So we're still fairly new in the infancy of procurement as a function. I think that's going to grow exponentially as the world turns going forward. So I think that's definitely one thing that I've noticed. But that casts a long shadow because it's changed, because the leadership, and I don't mean this pejoratively, but let's just call it what it is. Procurement leaders, 2 generations have not really met the moment. They have not stepped up. They have not led. And we are only now getting new generations of CPOs that are coming in that are of, let's just say my generation, Gen Xers and millennials soon to be. There's a couple that I know that are sort of stepping into these shoes and saying, you know what, this is how I want to do it. I want to put my mark on this, and we're going to do it that way. So I think the leadership change, because so you asked me what I learned. One of the things I learned for 20 years, CPOs, maybe even almost my entire time in this, but at least 20 years, CPOs have said, well, whatever the CIO says is what we're going to do. We're an SAP shop. We're an Oracle shop. That's abdicating your responsibility. Like in this digital age, you can't just take what the CIO says, because the CIO is not incented for your success. Like they're not measured on your success. They're just measured on random annual budget savings. But B, they have no idea what is necessary. And their motivation is that whatever vendor will take them to a golfing trip several times a year, that's their motivation, and to remain relevant in an era where they've become totally irrelevant. So that's like really the leadership has been a real struggle. And then if you go down to the actual individual folks that do procurement, it used to be 20, 25 years ago was people ended up in procurement because nobody knew where else to put them and they didn't want to fire them.
There was no degrees or anything, right? People just fell into it.
Yeah, and I fell into it too, right? So I'm not even saying that I'm, but now we have programs, we're talking about it. I get like a lot of folks in university reach out. I want to say kids in university. That's how old I'm feeling. But, these youngins come out and they want to meet, they want to talk. And I talk to them and I give them sort of early stage career advice. And so we didn't have that 10 years ago. We didn't have that. And then the only other thing I would say is if you had sort of suspect leadership and people that were not passionate about procurement, then what you have is a really deadly middle management layer that does, from a technology point of view, their incentive is to extend projects to make them more complicated because they're just clocking in, clocking out, waving their arms, being in lots of meetings and not advancing the ball. And just to put it in your realm, Conrad, when we talk about supplier master data, like a middle manager is usually the one assigned to that. And their goal is to come up with and I've seen this, so I'm speaking from experience here. Their goal is to come up with the use case that is the supplier that is an Indonesian supplier that serves the China market that gets paid in British pounds. And so the entire user requirements are based on the most complicated outlier. And meanwhile, 90% of the suppliers that we could master sit there unaddressed because this middle manager wants to spend 9 months trying to figure out how to solve this one problem that is probably not solvable. So anyway, I get a little passionate and going on my own soapbox here, but I think that's the thing I've learned over the things I've learned.
That's amazing. I'd love to have Natasha and Zach ask a couple of questions, but what I gathered from that is I kind of expected technology insights, and what I'm hearing is leadership and influence insights as to what's really changing here, partially generationally as we go through kind of the procurement cycle, maturity and growth. But yeah, very cool. Natasha?
Yeah, I would like to double click on that too, Dr. Elouise, because you said something that I think secretly many procurement professionals are maybe not as confident as you stated it. So your vision is that as technology develops, the role of procurement professionals will become even more important than it is today, and it will grow from the influence and impact perspective. Many procurement people are concerned that kind of like automation and of tasks, and also putting a lot of AI and kind of like artificial smartness and will eliminate the need of them. And you think differently, and your perspective will be very valuable to all our listeners and viewers. So if you can double click on that and say more, that would be great.
So I look forward to automating what procurement does today. Hands down. Like if you can get the automation to come in and run, to develop a category strategy, to run my sourcing events, to award the business, to negotiate the contract, and then to manage requisitions, invoice payments. If I had a magic button and a bunch of agents could come in and do that, I would say, please do that. And in Natasha, yes, that would eliminate what procurement does today. Where I think this is, and by the way, just a sidebar, this is what's happening to IT, or has been happening to IT for a couple decades. That's why CIOs are not relevant anymore. But also legal is going through this, HR is going through this, finance is going through this. And when you have floors of a massive, you worked at Salesforce, like if you look at the Salesforce tower, how many of those floors are occupied by finance people? In Kearney's office, we have like half of a floor was finance people once upon a time. Those jobs are all getting automated too. But the problem for those folks is that as finance collapses, the number of people in finance collapses, the number of people in HR collapse. There's nothing for them to go on to do in the enterprise. To me, for procurement, we're just getting started. So you collapse all this source to pay busy work. Thank you. Please, I will take that today. Because what we really need to be doing is real risk management, is real supplier relationship management, things that cannot be automated. And I like to use this example. We are in an era where businesses, the organization of businesses, at least to this moment in time, where private equity owns just about everything, and everything they don't own, you have a series of massive companies that own a lot of smaller companies. So in that realm, now we're not just looking at vendors that we pay, which is if you're just doing sourcing or contracts or invoices. Vendors we pay is a very narrow view, but actually we need to be looking at the vendors we pay actually are in many cases, because of this business environment, they are our customers as well. And in some cases, they're our competitors too. So as procurement, our opportunity is to start looking at this more holistically, because sales is never going to do that. They're out trying to make their numbers, and nobody else, like this is what the future of business is going to be. And who is well positioned to do that? The people that own one leg of that stool, or actually, I would argue two legs of that stool, because we own vendor contracts and we also understand supply markets. So understanding the competitive landscape is exactly where we play. And so, sorry, this is turning into a lecture.
No, keep going.
I'm like, no, this is not the lecture. It's a song. And okay. I'm like, I am swimming in your words, because I'm like, where have you been all my life? Right? Like,
yeah. So, and Conrad knows what I'm going to say here is when we talk about risk management, quote unquote, or third party risk management, what we're really doing right now is risk theater, which is very much like the TSA, when you go to American airports, at least, is just security theater. They're not securing the airports, and we're not securing the enterprise, because guess what? Natasha, you were at Nike. The greatest risk to Nike is not the employees. It's the third parties. It's the X thousand. I have clients with 50,000 suppliers, 100,000 suppliers. I have one client with 200,000 suppliers. You are not managing 200,000 suppliers. In fact, if you have more than 1,000 hitting your systems, you are not managing that. You are just lucky. And so that's the work to do. And that gets into architecture and separating out and doing things. And so the tell that, like, I sort of set clients up for this, but if I ask you how many suppliers do you have, nobody ever says I have 3,622. If you don't know if you don't know that number off the top of your head and are not checking that every day, you are not doing your job as a leader, because what that means is you have X number of third parties hitting your systems unmanaged. And so that's the work that we have to do. And so just to put it a fine point on that is, what's the work that procurement's going to do? We're going to take the top 1,000 suppliers, top 100 are tier one, the other 900 are tier two, and these are arbitrary sort of numbers. Everybody else, get them out of your system. Doesn't mean you have to stop working with them, but get them out of your systems, because all you're doing is setting up undue risk.
By out of your system, you mean access to your network, or do you mean like get them as a record out of your master data database?
Correct. Get them out of you. So you could still have a record of them. But set up a third party that is managing them.
Where they will be, that will be
right. And you could still get the data into your master data. But let's say you onboard, like Natasha onboards me as a supplier to do a public speaking event at when she was at Nike. So now, first of all, this is frustrating because now I have to onboard into Nike systems. And now Nike has a record for me and all the overhead that's associated with it for somebody that just did a one-time presentation. And I might do another presentation in 3 years or 5 years. So why did we all go through that effort?
Yeah. And
it's frustrating for me. So why do you have thousands of people like me in any given system?
And I would add to that it doesn't matter of the geographic expansion, the volume of goods or services the company produces. There's not a company in the world that needs 200,000 suppliers to effectively provide its goods and services. And as a procurement professional, I stand by this statement, right? And I think what enterprises often miss is that each supplier represents a benefit to your environment, and that each supplier represents a risk to your environment. And there are very few companies that have a thorough protocol on how do you evaluate these risks in the first place when you bring a provider on board, and then how you maintain verifying these risks if they remain your provider for 10 years in a row, because their legal and financial and economic position changes. And if you're relying on a third party to a high degree, then you may not, you as a business, as an enterprise, can miss significant risks. Thank you for highlighting this point, because in one of our episodes, we did talk about supplier relationship management and program, and how very few organizations and buyers and procurement professionals actually give suppliers a just approach. Give suppliers a fair approach and view them as a true partners and sources of knowledge and subject matter experts who see a lot of variances in the industry that they represent, versus seeing someone who you always want to squeeze on the margins. So this is a very important point that you highlighted. So taking into consideration what you just said about how the mindset of procurement people should shift from tactical transactional activities to focusing on supplier relationship management, risks for the enterprise, and more strategic thinking. What kind of new skill set or daily approaches I come to my desk if I want to be effective 5 years from now, when AI and procurement will be very much embedded in the environment, what do I need to start training myself on today? How do I need to do my job differently today to be relevant 5 years from now?
Yes. So this is going to be a winding answer. I guess all my answers have been winding so far. So
those are stories. We love your stories.
Thank you. So as I come to work in 5 years, there's no doubt in my mind that every employee is a manager. That's what I like to say. Every employee is a manager of agents. Now, we don't have to say that of agents part, but that's really what I mean. And so our job is to manage those agents that are going to do all the things that are busy work today. So if I'm responsible for sourcing the IT category, well, why would I not have a bunch of agents? Why would I not have an agent that does research on all the latest developments in SaaS, in grid computing, in quantum computing, and that agent continually refining and understanding what's happening in the IT market? And then I might have another agent for benchmarks that might connect to a company like Green Cabbage or Barreau or like whoever remains in that market, and however that market evolves. And then why would I not have another series of agents that run sourcing events, another agent to monitor IT requisitions to see if people are buying on their credit cards like I do and others. And why would I not have an agent to monitor POs and all the other stuff that's associated with the IT category? Like all that stuff, actually, we could do today. It's probably not as seamless as it will be in a year, 2 years, 3 years. So the way I need to be looking at that is mapping out in my head on my whiteboard, what are the agents I need and how will I deploy them? Because that's not, while it's technically possible today and folks are making some steps in that direction, it's going to take several years if we're really honest. Now, the technology's there, but the people are not there. And so our job is to take these giant steps that's going to take us. And the older you are, the bigger the step it's going to be. And the more of them you have to take. And that's just a fact. And yet we're the ones in the leadership positions. So we have a lot of work to do. And our job as leaders is to enable this generation to these next generations to do this, even if we don't understand it, because just simply saying SAP, we're doing SAP or Oracle just because the CIO said so, like we're way, way beyond that. And then also the fact that the CIO may not have deployed an agent framework for us today. Absolutely everybody should be doing, let's just call it AI agents, familiarity with all these technologies in their personal lives. And if you have kids, you're already confronting this. So like this is, you're having to deal with, my nephew recently got in trouble for submitting a paper that he had used ChatGPT, which of course seems like, why would you be doing this at this point? But like this is coming in our daily lives. So we have to get more comfortable with this. And so what this means, back to your question, Natasha, I don't need to train people on quote unquote category strategy or category management or how to negotiate. All of these things, these sort of traditional skills for procurement are going away. I mean, humans are terrible at negotiating, and there's this great, I'll take a detour here. There's this great example on LinkedIn. If you see this video of a guy interviewing for a coding job, and so he's doing a Zoom like this, but what you see is he's got a window right up next to him with ChatGPT, listening to what the interviewer is asking, and is giving the answers right then and there. And so we are imminently going to see negotiation agents sitting right next to us as we're in a negotiation, telling us what to do. And then at a certain point, we're just going to get the humans out of that mix. So why would we do negotiations training? That seems so silly to me. And so what this gets to the core of your question is we need to develop different skills to think about the business. Remember, I use that example of vendor, customer, and competitor. So we have to think about the business as a whole versus, hey, I'm just paying a supplier every year. And then we also have to think about network design and all those agents I was giving you. That's thinking about a network of agents that are going to go work on my behalf. And guess what? That network of agents needs to work in conjunction with Conrad's 20 agents. And so we need to think much more big picture. And so, yeah, the skills become much softer. They become, how do we communicate? How do we just learn? Because the skills and keys to success are different than they have been in no time in probably the last 100 years. The real keys to success are hard work, motivation, and creativity. That's it. And so the people paradigm is going to shift massively. And I will just say, because is that people are it's not the technology anymore. We have all the technology we need, or we will. It's the people, like there's a huge disparity between where the technology is and where the people are.
You're making me think of this statement I'm often telling people, which is, or question I'm asking, like, are you a procurement person doing business, or are you a business person doing procurement? And as you're talking about these principles, it feels like, procurement person feels, at a base level, very transactional, and maybe negotiations and maybe all these other things. And at a certain point, I mean, we've also been, like, you're saying all agents, and I'm thinking about all the people I've put offshore that are kind of my offshore agents over the last 20 years. Yeah. And now I can actually do it better, faster, cheaper than even that was.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, well, how am I going to spend my time? So, like, becoming a real business expert. Zach, I've got to think you've got 25 questions on your mind. I know that you're deep into this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many angles. I think the skills part is really important. But for me, it's about how you make that transition, Dr. Elouise, to from procurement of goods and services, I see it, to the procurement of innovation, right? To the procurement of efficiency. Like, it's a fundamental change in how we see procurement, which is procurement of goods and services and trying to get the best cost. We were talking earlier about suppliers and how you segment your suppliers and making sure, you focus on the strategic suppliers. Very often in procurement functions, we see that procurement is left out of the conversations with some of the biggest suppliers who may not necessarily be suppliers. They might be alliance partners. There's some kind of revenue partner, for example. I mean, does the scope extend to those suppliers that procurement has traditionally been kept away from, from the sales teams or the revenue generation teams who are saying this is really our domain? I mean, do you see procurement muscling in, quote unquote, on that kind of segment? I mean, I love the idea of, like, blowing the opportunity wide open in terms of, like, creativity. And I do think it's a challenge that procurement needs to rise up and meet. I'm just wondering, how do we actually do that?
So to answer both Conrad's statement and your question, if not us, who? And I would argue we are as important. I'm going to give you two sides of this coin. If we show up to the table, we are as much a part of the business as the engineers, as the marketers. So we are unequal in the business, and we have to start thinking like that. Now, let me walk that back. Kearney responds to a lot of RFPs. I get put into a lot of sort of RFP responses, and people have learned, both Kearney and the clients don't like it when I show up, because what am I doing when I sit in those meetings? I'm bored out of my mind. So I start evaluating the procurement people. The procurement people in that meeting are following some random process they don't understand, but they're ticking the box and they're not using critical thinking skills. And so then I just sit back and evaluate them. And I can say when I look at those folks, they are weak. And again, I'm not trying to be pejorative. I'm just trying to be realistic. They're not adding value. And most of the procurement folks doing quote unquote procurement, like stop doing that. You're just making yourself look stupid. And when in reality, again, this gets back to, we have data. So are we using the data? So in your example, Zach, maybe an alliance partner or a university. This gets back to, well, we know what the supply market is. I mean, how many companies have, let's just use Bureau. How many companies have Bureau? Bureau has supply market information beyond anything else. And even if you don't like it, then you could augment it with deep research or whatever. And so now I can walk into any product meeting, design meeting, engineering meeting, looking at this, not only with who we're spending money with, but who we could be spending money with, and what this supply market looks like and what the commodity market looks like. And then we can bring in some other data. And all of a sudden we've walked into the business with a lot of power. And that's how we do that. Because if you just show up with your PowerPoint of process, like, don't even bother. Just stay home that day, because you're not like, we have to do 3 bids and a buy. And if it's a supplier, like you're talking about OpenAI, but we're Google, like you're wasting everybody's time, especially yours. And so that's how we do it. And I would argue, just to build that point, most of the future is going to be third parties that we interact with. And so again, back to my paradigm of, so it's not only competitors, customers, and vendors, but it's also universities, NGOs, governments. And so I would argue over time, governments are going to have more direct influence and control over what corporations are doing in their particular region, which is going to take a lot more procurement oversight. Because if procurement doesn't do it, who's doing it?
You know, we show up to work often and do what's easy and comfortable because we've done it in the past. You're saying that, I'm like, stop acting like a human agent, right? Like, you're going to be replaced if an agent can do what you're doing. And so what do you have, like, Zach, your question is how to go to that next level. Like, what are those things that an agent can't do? And like back in the beginning of the conversation, you were talking about leadership, influence, relationships. You know, these are the things that somebody has to do to get there. And I don't think it's just the CPO, right? It's people at all levels of the organization that have to start acting more like a leader. You called it a manager, you know, have the influence, you know, become a business person, not just a transactional RFP person.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, the moments will come. In March of 2020, how many CPOs got calls from the CEO saying, can you find PPE? This manufacturing plant is shut down. So the moments will come. And by the way, that happened in, 2017 or 2018, when all of a sudden the first tariffs or the trade war hit. Like, all of a sudden, it was a moment. Procurement got drug into a moment. And I had a client that spent a month in a crash effort to answer the question that should have been at the fingertips. And I would argue, Conrad, that, as you said, that CPO and his team were doing what was easy. They were not doing the hard work when nobody was looking, because they, it was like, I'm going to, I leave at 4 every day. And some days they sneak out at 3:45 so I can go coach my kids' team, whatever sport they play. When reality, you got to be working ahead, because when those crises come, and to Zach's question, they're going to come, and it's going to come from places that is not just vendors.
Yeah. I would say, Dr. Elouise, in my books, you're winning the title of the Procurement Disruptor of the Year.
My head's blowing up here, because I thought we were going to get together and talk about technology, and we're here talking about soft skills, influence, leadership.
Yeah,
I don't want to, by the way, we have a little bit more time set aside today than our typical podcast. So listeners, hang with us. This is amazing. And we're going to tap into a few other things. Natasha, I'm sorry to interrupt you here, but I really would love, we would be almost remiss not to ask Dr. Elouise, what in the friggin' heck is going to happen with technology and procurement over the next decade? Because the Gartner has orchestration, not even at the top of the hype cycle. They have AI at the top of the hype cycle. Like decisions are being made and like there's this whole future ahead of us and there's so much unknown still. And so, I'm sure you can't give us the 100% perfect or we could all buy stock somewhere and retire in 3 years. But like, how are you looking at it and how should the procurement leader look at this, all of these radical changes in technology into their tech stack?
Yeah, so this gets to that. Remember, I said we had the version 1, which is the .com boom, version 2, the suites, version 3, the SaaS explosion. Version 4 is the AI platform. And for me, that means a couple things. One, the AI platform really means a combination of orchestration and AI platform. And they don't have to be the same provider. Actually, I would argue they're not going to be. So we have a whole explosion of orchestration tools. So the Zip, Level Path, Oro, Opstream, on and on and on. All the others I can't. Please forgive me for not remembering them all. I'm getting old.
It's like
but
the
then
90s
we also
all over again. It's this total new generation of procurement suites being born.
Yeah, exactly. And they are. But the advantage they have is that they are built on a very modern AI infrastructure, whereas everything that's older than 3 years old is in real trouble. But then the other component of this version 4 is the underlying AI platform. So your Gemini, Anthropic, or OpenAI, because there are things that we need to do that as employees that are not going to be embedded in a procurement system. And that's okay. Everybody can work in harmony. And so what that does is, if you think about my spider map, essentially 90%, I like to say, if for those that are Talladega Nights fans, if you're not first, you're last. And so the folks there's a very narrow window of folks that will become legitimate players in the in the 4.0 platform space. And everybody else is either going to go away, get consumed, or become data feeds or very specialized agents. And so the whole thing is going to change. And by the way, because what's happening is we have these transactional systems, we have SaaS laying on top of it, and neither of which solve the problem. Some successes, some failures. But now we're going to layer on agents on top of that. But what's going to happen is the agents are going to obliterate the SaaS providers, and they're going to hollow out the transactional systems. So you can run your Ariba system for the next 20 years, God help you. But essentially, because the agents are going to be the ones interfacing with it, not you.
But Dr. Elouise, do you see one platform where all the agents are being configured, maybe powered by the likes of Anthropic and OpenAI, etc., or do you see sort of multiple AI suites, agent suites, let's call them, multiple spaces for different tools, or is this ultimately going to be just one big tool where you configure agents and it goes off and does all your tasks?
I think you have to have something that's procurement specific, because at the end, like, you can't, and this is where I might be wrong, but if you just go all in on Anthropic, let's say I'm not going to use any transact, like at a certain point you have to transact. I'm going to raise an invoice, and you got to pay it, or we got to do a PO. And then like there are legitimate, we have to onboard somebody. I have to onboard somewhere and give somebody my banking information so that somebody can sign off and I can get paid. So there is going to be this procurement specific layer. Now, there are going to be agents underneath all that. So sort of the P2P process and most of the S to C that is going to be largely automated. So I would again, putting on my future tinfoil hat, I think tools like Level Path and Zip and Oro and Opstream and whoever else I can't remember, they're going to play in that space, because at some point you have to be, and they're going to be the next generation suite. What I think is different is that they are built so that it's not human to machine interface, it's machine to machine. And so that's why all the suite providers are in real trouble, because they're a couple generations of technology behind. But even the SaaS providers that are older than 3 years are in real trouble because they're also not built. They have to retrofit and to meet that need. And so that's where I think it'd be. But I also, like, if I want to build an agent to do research on let's go back to my IT example, grid computing versus quantum computing, I'm not going to build that agent in one of the orchestration platforms. And by the way, if I have 20 agents and Conrad has 20, Natasha has 20, and Zach, you have 20, well, we have 80 agents running around creating chaos. So we need some sort of orchestration framework. So I think the orchestration players will evolve to help manage that chaos. But also, I'm not going to build a research agent in one of those orchestration providers. I forgot the question, by the way. I just got down my rack.
I think a couple of weeks ago in San Francisco, one of your team members was talking about research that indicated whether procurement teams and corps are going to create their own agents, or procure tech organizations are going to create the agents. And it actually was a pretty stunning percentage of enterprises that feel like they'll be creating their own agents. If you're in a procurement team, do I need to be hiring somebody that's an agent genius, or like part of this like skill forward thing? I mean, we've all played around with ChatGPT and all these other super cool hands-on, call them more consumer home family things. But what do I do now if I'm writing these things? How do I get smart at writing an agent and integrating it into my work process?
So this is a little bit of a bifurcation, and this is where I disagree with just about everybody in the market, because without offending folks, when we talk about use cases and GenAI use cases, and by the way, I just went scouring LinkedIn for procurement GenAI use cases, and I was appalled at what came back. And now I use what I found, I use in my presentations to make fun of folks of how stupid consultants and systems integrators and analysts are, or these people pontificating, because everybody that's putting out Gen AI procurement use cases is really just trying to sell you yesterday's tool, solution, consulting with the AI sort of buzzword. I flip it around and I say, if I'm going to do agentic workforces, I want personal productivity in support of team productivity, in support of op model productivity. And here's the thing, I can do all of that today. I don't even need to wait for the lazy CIO to put the AI platform inside and deploy it. Now, if we fast forward a year, then almost every company will have their AI platform. And guess what happens? When that comes in, I'm ready to build agents because I have been working on my personal productivity. And so, again, I sort of alluded to this. Gen Xers, we have a lot of work to do to get over that intellectual hump. We're not worried about the boomers because they're on their way out of the workforce statistically. But millennials will have some work to do, and Gen Z and Gen Alpha won't have nearly as much because it'll be much more sort of acculturated for them. So, but for those of us that are in leadership positions and that have to do a lot of extra work, we should be doing the work now, or we're going to get completely, we're going to be dinosaurs just staring at the, the comet or whatever that hit the earth. We're just going to be like dumbfounded. And so my push to everybody is start learning this. Just it's good to use ChatGPT. Great, fine. But I would challenge, Zach, you look younger, so I'm just going to challenge Natasha and Conrad because I know they're my generation. But I'll challenge you too. You should be all of you should be building agents today for your personal stuff, if nothing else. And there's no excuse not to do that. And Conrad, you and I talked earlier this week. Did you make a note of it in your relationship management database? Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. But why did you do it? Why not just have an agent do it automatically? And we didn't record the session, but why did we not just record the session and have that transcribed and auto appended to there's no reason we shouldn't be doing these things today. And yeah, anyway.
So where do we, Gen X, start to educate ourselves on that? It's a real question, right? Because I am used to relying on a large team that will bring me the end result, and I don't have to go and train myself on all the steps how to get to the result. Now, as I'm building the business, I'm in a different situation. I don't have that large team, and I understand that being a true representative of Gen X, I have to learn all of it. Where do I go? Where do I start? What are my resources?
So, there are. I have a flip answer, but go to ChatGPT, go to Gemini, go and ask, because the first thing that I did, because somebody was coaching me and saying, just go build an agent. It's so easy. And then of course I opened up Gemini Studio and I completely freaked out. But then I just started asking Gemini, well, if I want to do this and this and this, and then the next thing you know, I built an agent. And it's like, it took me 5 minutes. So I think as Gen Xers, we're used to this big learning curve, and it is a big learning curve. And I like to joke that we're the generation that we had to buy music on 8 tracks, and then we bought it on vinyl or vice versa. And then we bought cassette tapes and had to figure out, I saw an ad where a woman was, rewinding with the pencil, and then we had to buy music on CDs and figure out how to make sure.
Oh my gosh, you're making me feel so old.
Yeah, exactly. But then we had to, and then we got MP3 players, and we had to rip our CDs onto the computer, and then we got Napster, and then we downloaded everything for free, and now we're paying for streaming. So we've gone through. Let's just pick on Xers here first.
iPod in between.
Yeah, an iPod in there, and now we got yeah, exactly. So we have learned this, and we've adopted many technologies, so we can do this. And by the way, we grew up pre-computers, then we learned computers, and then we learned the internet, and then we learned, smartphones, and now. So this is just the next evolution. I think we're getting older and tireder and maybe crankier because we keep investing all this time and money into things that get outdated. So, but I think if you just leave that aside, we could just sit, these tools are powerful. And I'm getting to the point where I can just say, I need this, and there you go. And so my push for Xers is to just get past the fear and really jump in.
Yep.
I have a box of cassette tapes in my basement. And I just saw them the other day, and I am having emotional, this is exactly the point you're talking about. I'm having emotional trauma, cutting that out of my life and throwing it in the dumpster. I might some point in the future want to do it. It's never going to happen. It's just on the cloud now, impossible. So yeah, we're the generation that are the bridge from paper to digital, right? Our parents are totally paper. Our kids are totally digital. And it freaking hurts to hold all of that together in so many dimensions.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And we are this stretch generation. Yeah. But I abhor getting paper now. And I abhor getting unsolicited phone calls. And I remember, up until recently, of course you would just pick up the phone and call people. We even use that I use that saying all the time, not even realizing nobody picks up the phone and calls anymore.
Zach, you and Natasha have been our key to making this practical. So I would love it if the two of you could just kind of take a 30 seconds, a minute and a half, 2 minutes, whatever. Okay, this is what I got out of it. And then Elouise, you've got the last word. What would you add on top of that? Because we really want people. Proc-N-Roll is all about being practical, not just pontificating. So would love to get it, tangible for everybody. Zach, you go first, then Natasha, then back to Dr. Elouise.
I think this episode's been so insightful for me. I think just one of the big things that is sticking out in my head, it's almost like we have a blank job description for procurement professionals, right? Where we're going to strip out everything that's on there. We're going to replace it with some new skills that are going to be needed. The first of which is going to be, you need somebody who's very tech avant-garde, knows agents, can manage a team of agents, and is dealing with that. And then we need to populate the rest with all the stakeholder relationship management and the innovation and the new skill sets that are going to be needed from procurement teams in the future. So I think that's one big insight I've taken away, and to really embrace all the change that's coming with AI. Natasha?
So we started with your first spider web, right? And you recently, at the beginning of the year, you published your last one. So the 8th and the last. What would be your advice and suggestion to, thank you, producer, for putting it on the screen. So, and for our listeners who cannot see the screen, if the first one had about 15 different references, here is roughly 250-ish.
Yeah, I've never counted them.
300 maybe, just looking into it. What would be your guidance to procurement professionals if this is what they need to live by in 2025? How to navigate? What should be their selection criteria or on figuring out what's right for their environment?
So what made the spider chart powerful, I believe, is specificity. And by that, if you actually look at the labels on every logo, it's easy to create, and there's many charts with a bunch of logos on it. And that, they're by big categories. And that I always found that frustrating because so I've picked this category, and now I got to go through each of these and go to their website and figure out what they do. What I did is I talked to these companies, and in the early days, it was like 15 or whatever. And actually there were only 100 startups when I started tracking this. Now there's thousands. And what I would do is distill down what they do, the essence, into 2 words. Now, that's a tough. First of all, the providers themselves can't do it because they're trying to tell you the 600 things that they do, and I'm trying to make it just very bite size. You look at lean linking there. I'm just looking at that. Negotiation advisor. So now I have a frame of reference as to what they do. Now, I'm sure they do 6 other things, but to be able to distill this down. And the reason that's important is because what this represents is innovation in the market. And as a, let's say you're running digital for whatever organization, your goal is, or your job is to evaluate all of these potential capabilities and determine if you want to build or buy or not use it at all. And that becomes, and if you choose to go forward with it, what's the phasing? Is it a short-term, mid-term, long-term? And that was really the breakthrough that I had in this, is that I can take a 1-hour pitch, and trust me, I sat through some doozies, and I can distill it down to 1 sentence so that I can go to my clients and say, hey, have you heard of, I'm just picking up Bluebeam. Bluebeam does da 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 da. I can do it in 1 sentence. But then I can distill it down even further into 2 words. And obviously the startups didn't like that, and the tech companies. And I would always get, well, we do more than that, or can we change? And so that ability to articulate and evaluate them down, because what you get in a sales pitch or a demo is just a lot of fluff, but let's cut right to the chase. What is it? And so I would encourage you to get to that level of comfort and familiarity. And can you describe the solution in 1 sentence or 2 words? Although I will admit the 2 words is hard. And that's really gets you to that deep level of saying, okay, now I understand this. And sort of to then, as we move forward, the question is do I need to buy this? Because the buying of SaaS software has certainly taken a hit. but now can I get an agent to do this? And even if you take Elouise circa 2017 and you actually, if I went back and right now I could redo this spider chart, at least the analysis with agents. And because I used to run this in Excel and then it outgrew Excel and I didn't have the team behind me to do this, but I could have actually with agents now, I could do that if I wanted to. I don't, and I'm not going to. But that's sort of the power of this because I don't have a team and sort of that's true for everything. So Conrad, you mentioned BPOing. If I can BPO it, I can automate it. And maybe it doesn't make sense, but eventually that's what we're getting into. So as we go forward, it's stopping and thinking, oh, can I just build or buy this? And it was never about the actual, like it's helpful, the analysis, but part of the reason that I put logos on this chart was because I talked to the founder, folks like Conrad, and I determined, I was able to see if he was full of nonsense or actually he was legit, knew what he was talking about. And I did this for thousands of startups. And I very much believed if the logo made it on the chart, it's because I believed in the founder and the founder's vision and their ability to execute. So ultimately, to tie everything together, our job as humans is relationship management. And so the ability to articulate all these crazy changes or the job that procurement does vis-a-vis the business and our ability to develop and cultivate relationships.
I love it how even when we talk about purely technology, you still bring it to the relationship and people.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, that brings us here to the end of the Proc-N-Roll podcast with Dr. Elouise Epstein. We will have you back. This has just been too much fun. And I only have like 75 more hours of questions to ask you. So
thank you for having me. This was so fun.
Yeah, it's total blast. So practical, like influence, leadership, and even in the last point, like don't be afraid of technology. Start building agents, and on your tech stack, don't advocate this to somebody else. Don't let IT make your decisions, and don't like be far enough away from all this stuff that your team's making the decisions. Like you need to be deep in this stuff. So absolutely awesome. The concert comes to a close here. Watch for the concert t-shirts. We'll see you soon. Take care. Thank you so much, Dr. Elouise.
Thank you.